All right. Are we live? I need to check this out because I can't see if we are live. We should be live. Like I said, it live. Let me just check it out. Oh, it says that I'm live. Let me see the comments over there. I need you people to tell me if everything sounds great, if everything is okay. Yeah, it seems that we are live. Live. Very good. All right, so we're going to wait a little bit for some people to come over. Let me just remove the guitar. So there were so many things happening these days. I am busy AF, people, all right? But there's some good stuff. I'd like to bring you up to date with some of these things. I'm going to switch off the guitar. I would like to bring you up to date with some of the things happening currently with the Slightly Technical Academy, with the course. So I'm going to start off with that. So here's the thing. The course is almost fully uploaded. There are a lot of people who bought the course, and I'm super surprised and super happy about that. And it is coming up really, really well. Just the last few days are a complete disaster because I gotta render it all and edit all these things. And it is so much work, people. It is a disaster. So I prepared a few lessons today, and I'm gonna render them during the night because now I'm doing the breadboarding and prototyping part, which is super interesting. But, you know, when you have to do everything in post-production, you kind of have to figure out how it's gonna look. Sometimes I need to do some stuff for the first time, so that is a little bit annoying, but it's the first one, so it is a lot of work. In any case, I think, hopefully, I'm not going to promise this, but until the end of the week, the entire course is going to be up and uploaded and live. I had a bunch of technical things. Good evenings, Bloccadelier. Bloccadelier. Right. Good evening. Greetings from the Netherlands. What's up? Where are you from? Exactly, in the Netherlands. Netherlands rocks the burgers as well. So, what I was saying, I was talking about the academy and the course. It is ridiculous how much work it is, but I'm not complaining. It is super cool. I think it's coming up like really, really nice. And I feel like a lot of people will be happy with that whole thing. So that's sort of the update for the academy. And I'm supposed to start doing a lot of new videos as soon as I finish up with this course. This course was the reason why I didn't put out a lot of videos. That's why we're doing more of these lives, even though I'm going to continue doing the lives pretty much every week, because there are a lot of people coming up to these lives. And I feel like it's a very good platform to just analyze some circuits, to talk about some things that kind of interest us all. I'm still figuring out the time for the live. So this time I don't expect the same people because I started it in a completely different day, completely different time. But let's see how it goes. In any case, I always figure out topic, what I'm gonna talk about in the videos. So the beautiful oversized village pretending to be a city. Hangalo. I actually don't know about it. Sorry. Yeah, but that's like why would I know about it? That's as you know, normally I remember doing dry docks in Rotterdam, obviously Amsterdam, all the dams. But that's as far as I go when it comes to the Netherlands. I don't know more about the country. Now, there is a topic that I wanted to discuss today because I somehow feel that every live should have a topic. And the topic that I wanted to discuss today is a rather interesting one, and is the topic of listening to guitars on YouTube. And the reason why I want to talk about this whole thing is primarily because I would like to share some information with you about recording guitars, producing guitars, and specifically producing guitars for YouTube. And I think that a lot of people are going to benefit from this kind of information. This is in no way, I'm going to talk about some other YouTube channels, but I didn't plan to do this. So I would talk about some other YouTube channels and saying how, like whatever they do is not correct, or, everybody does stuff in a different way. I don't care about that, but times are kind of changing. I sort of talk about that frequently. And hey, can you please turn up the volume? Well, actually, no, because I can see that now I'm pretty loud. I mean, technically, I can turn up the volume, but I'm gonna be clipping, so it should be okay. I think maybe if you can turn it up on your end. Yeah. So basically, what I was talking about, I mentioned a few things in some of my videos in which I kind of criticized some of the sounds that we are listening on YouTube. And I feel that this live situation is really good for explaining these things because I guess a lot of people misunderstand what I say sometimes. Maybe sometimes I don't phrase it in the right way, but I do have a kind of a hot take on this whole thing. And we've been yeah, Emperor Kamikaze is here. YouTube nonsense. Well, let's ease into this live, all right? So let's not start with the drama yet, all right? But there's gonna be some, all right? So basically, what I'm specifically talking about is the fact that we kind of got used to listening to guitars on YouTube and eventually deciding whether we want to purchase a certain item, a certain piece of gear, based on what we hear on YouTube. Now, that kind of resulted in today's day and age because I can clearly feel, and I'm not the only one who clearly feels, that there's a lot of hype regarding that. And this is something that's that's a story that's getting reiterated on this channel because I want to talk about it. Nobody talks about it. There's a lot of hype regarding gear. There's also not a lot of gear available. Not available, but like there's not a lot of new gear, and you can clearly see that a lot of channels are really struggling with their content because there's not a lot of new gear, because a lot of people are kind of well, let's just say that if you run a YouTube channel, you need to be inspired to do new things, and that's totally great. However, if you base your YouTube channel on new gear getting released, if you base your YouTube channel on sort of like the hype, meaning that there's not a lot more that you would like to offer, that you can offer, whatever the reason. And there are different channels. There are some channels that struggle with this problem more, and some channels that don't struggle with it at all. But clearly, we've had the hype. We've had the whole thing happening. There was a lot of that, and we can clearly see now that we're getting a lot less of these YouTube videos and, that kind of story. So, in general, my hot take on this whole story about the YouTube guitar sounds is that there are, I would say, in a way, hearing a guitar on YouTube is nonsense. And I would like to elaborate on this. I always make the example of the audiophile world where people are, doing some kind of marketing for speakers or stuff that's like speaker related. In the hi-fi world, amplifiers, similar things, which you don't really hear over YouTube. You can't actually hear it because you have a problem. The only thing that you can do is watch a guy, and that guy is going to tell you it has a lot of bass, it doesn't have bass, it's mid-rangey or whatever. He's going to give you his opinion, and based on that information, you're supposed to make the purchase or not make the purchase, right? Which is kind of weird, right? And in the guitar world, we have these musicians who present the equipment to us, which is super interesting, right? Because there was a time when we all watched Gearman Dude, and it was ridiculously awesome because we had this guy who had a white coily cable and a Dr. Z amplifier, and he would run a few pedals. He would play some kind of bluesy stuff, and he would kind of not really give us an opinion, but you can deduct if he would really like something. But that was like the early age, right? All right, so I need to put up some comments. So Emperor Kamikaze, so many reviews for the new Helix that doesn't exist. Yeah, I guess that's the only product that's like new, so everybody's doing that one. And we've got Chris from Jupiter Effects. For the next 5 minutes, you're not allowed to say speaker. Oh, let's play that game. I'm gonna try. All right. So, basically, what happened is that we had all these guys, the early guys. They were presenting pedals, and all of a sudden, we had the entire industry. We had a bunch of YouTubers making a lot of videos describing pedals and that kind of stuff. Eventually, it turned into ridiculous hype and product releases and that kind of stuff. And people got like really, really, really confused. It is weird because I mentioned in one of my early videos that sometimes I feel that I can get more information about a product from somebody who is recording stuff on an iPhone than like professionally recorded stuff. And I want to get into the like professionally recorded stuff because we want to demystify how this stuff is done, how stuff is recorded, what are the steps in the post-processing that can potentially happen on channels, and not all channels do the same thing. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I really feel that people should be aware of these things, because when you are aware of these things, you will be able to create a better, let's just say, image of a certain device. Because what happened to me is that I would watch a lot of different YouTubers and a lot of reviews of a certain piece of gear, and it would sound ridiculously good. But when I would try it live, I wouldn't really like it, or I wouldn't get what I actually heard, right? So we're coming to the topic of certain people doing like really good demos of equipment, and obviously certain people doing not really good demos of equipment. This is something that I actually spoke about with Chris in our podcast, because if you didn't watch that podcast, go watch that entire podcast because it's great. It's a lot of fun. But Chris also opened up about some certain things about YouTubers where we currently have this scenario where a lot of YouTubers are constantly explaining themselves that they are not taking any directives from the companies, that whatever they do by themselves on their own account. They have their way of demoing a certain piece of equipment. But the reality is that a lot of these YouTubers are not really competent to talk about certain pieces of gear. Where some of the YouTubers, many of the YouTubers actually are really good guitar players. Many of the YouTubers, you would be surprised, are not really good guitar players. Somebody like me, right? But I don't really even try to be a guitar player here on YouTube. But what I'm trying to say is that this was interesting because on GitCon, I was actually surprised because we had a lot of these guys come and we were recording everything live, and people came and started recording, and they were like, oh, we're going to record live. So what's going to happen now? Well, yeah, you have to record live so you can't make mistakes, right? So that was a problem because a lot of people edit their stuff, right? So in any case, getting back to the sound, different people have different styles. That's the first thing that I would like to talk about a little bit, because different people have different styles, and not every reviewer should be reviewing a certain product. Because what happens is that because you misunderstand the product, you can make it, sound weird or bad, or you can use it in some ways in which this certain product was not intended to be used, which I think is a very important thing, because I've seen a lot of videos of people patching up pedals in some weird ways and getting some weird results. A lot of YouTubers would even do an entire video of a certain pedal or an amplifier where they would patch stuff, let's just say incorrectly or in a weird way, because they don't know how it's supposed to function, or they would try certain combinations of certain combinations of pedals that don't necessarily work together, and they would be like, they wouldn't give a competent explanation why that doesn't work. That's why we I guess we need to move on to some more, competent reviews. Now, I know this is like a hot take, and I said competent a few times, and I'm sure that a lot of people would feel insulted, but frankly, I will finish whatever I wanted to talk about. Speaking of some comments, so, Emperor Kamikaze is saying, today we review this new guitar through a great amp, expensive mic, mastering plugins. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in this video, definitely. Dave Berry, evening. So, coming back to the story, what I just wanted to say is that different people do stuff in different ways. And some people do it better. Some people do it less good, right? And some people are really good guitar players. That's a very important part, because when you give a certain piece of gear to certain YouTubers or certain guitar players out there, they just play so well that stuff really sounds good in their hands. But I would say that the reason why it sounds good in their hands is because pretty much anything can sound good in their hands. And also there are people who have a certain style of production when it comes to YouTube videos, that whatever they record, it is going to sound good. And also, whatever they record, it is going to sound pretty much the same. Now, I know that this is yet again a really hot take, but when you have a certain style, if you send your song to Andy Wallace for mixing, you're going to get an Andy Wallace mix. If you send your song to a Joe Barresi mix, you will get the Joe Barresi mix. It is a certain style. They don't really deviate from this style. That's why if you watch pretty much like 10 videos of a Tube Screamer-esque type of a pedal from a single YouTuber, you are kind of going to always get the, consistent sound, pretty much a good sound. Now, what is really good about watching a single YouTuber all the time is that because of that consistency, and this really accounts for a lot of these YouTubers who are really good out there at doing their demos, because they're really consistent about their setup. That is great, because what you can do then, you can listen to a certain amplifier, for example, an amplifier on their setup, and you can go to another video where they use pretty much the same setup, You can listen to another amplifier because you have a reference. Now, references are ridiculously super important because if you don't have a reference, stuff just sounds the way it sounds. And how does it sound? Well, it really depends on what's your mood today, because if we're going to get into the psychoacoustics, really depends on what you're listening on. You're listening on headphones, speakers, whatever you're listening on. Are you in the mood today? Sometimes you're sick, so you don't hear the high end the same, and you can get a really weird opinion of a certain piece of gear if you're not in the mood for gear, or if you are kind of sick, so your ears are not functioning the same way they would function on a good day. Let's just say it like that. So references are really important, and I know that there's a bunch of channels who do this thing, I would say the right way, at least in my opinion, the right way, where they would give you this very nice, consistent setup where you know what to expect, and then they give you some comparisons within reason on the same setup, so you can kind of understand some of these differences. And I think that is the number one important thing when you want to listen to a piece of gear on YouTube, that you have certain references. And I want to demonstrate this just a little bit. So, Emperor Kamikaze, you say like Fluff's chug videos. I'll be honest with you, I never watched Fluff's videos. And I have nothing against Fluff, obviously, but I don't know. Whenever I would watch his videos, I mean, I watched some of them, but I didn't watch all of the videos. You know what I mean? So I don't know if he has a video series and stuff like that. So I don't really know the chug videos. I know Ola's chug videos. So manufacturers don't even bother making demo videos of hi-fi speakers because I said speakers. Chris, was it 5 minutes? Because it will sound like the gear used to record it. Yeah, that is absolutely correct. So, or even humidity. For some reason, my amp always sounds better when it rains outside. Can't say even if it's the air itself, influence of humidity on the ears themselves or whatever. Yeah, it could be that. It could be fluctuations in power when it's raining outside. Yeah, there's a lot of things, and I would say that it's really interesting to talk about these things. That's why I'm doing this video and this channel, because I want to talk about these things. This is not about making any other YouTuber sound bad. I don't want to talk shit about anybody. I don't care about these things. I want to talk about realistic stuff because people are going to benefit from this, right? I want to demonstrate something like really, really quickly. Chris, you have to count. So, let me just turn on the guitar. I want to demonstrate something super, super quickly for you because I want to illustrate how stuff sounds, all right? So I got this sound, okay? Yet again, I didn't touch the guitar since the last live. I'm going to use these lives to practice. But we've got this sound, right? It's a sound, okay? So what am I playing over there? This is like a YouTube demo now. So I play a pedal, this pedal, and it is one of my designs, very early designs. It's like a distortion pedal. So this is the clean sound. So this is the typical thing that you would get from YouTubers, right? So this is the clean sound. All right, so we have another challenge by Chris. Can't say guitar for 5 minutes. I just said it. But from now on, all right? And I'm going to say tool or toy. Maybe toy is better. So, this is the clean sound, right? I'm gonna make a video about this guitar. It's rather special what I have inside, so I made it a little bit darker because I have a control inside. So this is the clean sound, right? And if we switch the pedal on, so I'm purposely using a Fender amplifier because that one is in the room currently, and I'm also using a heavy distortion pedal. This is a rather scooped sound. This is a specific type of thing because I wanted the difference to be drastic. Now, what you heard just now is the sort of processing that I would normally do for like a YouTube video. Because I went through this process early on, I recorded some toys, and I recorded some of these sounds, and I wanted the sounds to be like really, really raw because I wanted to give the people like a really, really raw sound. Unfortunately, people don't really like to hear these really, really raw sounds. That is just the reality of that, right? So then I sort of started, all right, so, I can process the guitars, but then you come to the question, what am I going to do to these guitars? Because you can make them sound like really, really nice for a person sitting in a room listening to that guitar by themselves. That sound doesn't necessarily work in a mix, because whenever you mix something, you always make it sound right for that particular situation, for that particular mix. And sometimes when you listen to this, not sometimes, but most of the time when you listen to this stuff in solo, it's like super, super weird. There are some standards in guitar mixing. There is a way how people do it, and we're going to discuss it now, but you get what I'm saying. So I want to show you now. Basically, this is the sound that you're hearing now, but I actually used an EQ to cut out some mid-range. I used an EQ to scoop the sound a little bit. Why did I do that? Because scooping the sound, and there are a lot of people who record guitars do that, you scoop the sound a little bit gently, so you're not using like a narrow Q, so you make some kind of incision, because that can sort of sound weird, but like gently scoop the mids, because it sounds bigger when you scoop the mids, but it's not the sound of this pedal or this amplifier. So let me just remove that EQ now. I'm going to give you another sound sample, then I'm going to remove the EQ. What is interesting about this is that when you listen to a scooped sound and afterwards you go for this sort of mid-rangey unscooped sound, when you bring some of these mids back, your ears need some time to adapt. Usually scooping out some stuff it kind of sounds better at first. That's a psychoacoustic thing, right? Because you're going to be essentially hearing more bass and more highs. Now, when you create the sound like this, and this is a far more realistic sound that you would use in a context of a mix without that scooping thing. Now, obviously, I have to say that different mixes, different guitar sounds, you can make anything sound good if it's in the right picture, if it's a part of the right story, right? But your ears need to adapt to this whole thing now, just a little bit. But the interesting thing about this is the fact that just 4 dB of an EQ drastically changes the sound. That is sort of the point that I'm trying to illustrate. I'm not trying to illustrate a crazy good guitar sound, but I'm just saying, like, you've got 4 dBs of EQ that illustrates this. Now, what happens when you use a different audio interface? What happens if you use a different plugin? A lot of people would use different plugins, which are not parametric EQs like the Fab filter that I'm using now and showing you this kind of thing. And what happens is that some of these plugins have a color, and this color would maybe account for a certain frequency range that is lost or less or whatever. It increases the highs. And we don't really know what a lot of these YouTubers have. A lot of the times they would be talking about a transparent chain, which is kind of a thing that doesn't exist. And I'm just saying that with a small EQ move, you can drastically change the sound, and it can influence whether you like the sound or you don't like the sound. Now, this was only the first example, all right? So obviously, there are a lot of people who use different cabinets. That's a very important topic. A lot of people use different cabinets. Now, in this case, I'm using an IR, and I'm recording my Fender amplifier through the Fryette power station, and I'm using an IR. And I don't even know what kind of IR I'm using, but I think it's some kind of open back cabinet. So if I would switch the IR, I would yet again drastically change the sound, right? So let me go ahead and let me switch the IR for just something that I have over here. Let's see this. This is completely different. It's ridiculous. Let me just switch over to this. It was a bit quieter. Yeah, it kind of sounds cool because these cabinets are closed back. Let me try something else. No, let's get back to it. I can't find the IRs. Doesn't matter. So this is the open back one. It's quite interesting. And you get these drastic differences in sound, which I feel like is something that people should take in account. You have to take in account that everybody, every YouTuber, they use either different IRs or different cabinets and different microphones, different microphone placement, and all that influences the sound, right? Another very important thing when it comes to these types of sounds is whether YouTubers do this kind of typical post-processing that you would do to guitars. And that is sort of shelving some of the lows, shelving some of the highs. Not really shelving, but really like cutting. A lot of people are going to do that. A lot of mixers are going to do exactly that. And I want to demonstrate now how that sounds. So this is the sound that we have, and I have this whole thing engaged because I actually like the guitar sound with this whole thing applied, especially when it comes to a guitar sound that is of this type, right? So let's hear the first example. All right, but if I disengage the plugin that I'm using now to cut these highs and lows, I get this. All right, it kind of sounds a little bit more open because we have a little bit more of that presence range, which will be cut in a mix context. Because you hear these frequencies, which are pretty much in most of the mixes, most of the music that we like. This is the range of the cymbals. And what happens there is that you want to cut these frequencies in some way. Sometimes people cut it fully. Sometimes people do shelving. There are different techniques for sure. There are different mixing engineers who achieve different results, really depending on what kind of sound, what kind of amplifier you're using. But basically, you don't want these high frequencies. And sometimes when you try to illustrate something over YouTube, which can be only heard in the room, playing through a cabinet, it does not translate because you have a cut like this engaged. And I really love a cut like this because when I play through my studio monitors, I like hearing that. That's just my personal taste. Maybe somebody else doesn't like it. But let's hear it once again. So this is without the EQ. Now, what is super interesting about this? Well, the interesting thing about this is that I used a certain plugin that is supposed to simulate what a Neve preamp does, or like Neve preamp with an EQ. Like, what was it? Like a 1073 or something like that. So what happens with this? I'm gonna tell you, which is super, super interesting. You can select these. You've got the selectors, right, for the highs and for the lows, and you can kind of take out the lows. And usually they have these switch, like rotary switches, where you can select, for example, 80 hertz on the lows, and you can also use the rotary switch to cut the highs, for example, at 5 kilohertz or something like that. But what happens with that type of plugin, not only with that type of plugin, but with the hardware unit, is that it doesn't just cut these frequencies just like you would have on a FabFilter EQ. So everything just doing like a cut. No, it actually also increases some of the frequencies, because I don't really remember now, but I guess these are definitely not first order filters. And I don't want to get into the filter whole thing. For sure, we're going to talk about it on this channel. But there is a reason why this EQ not only cuts everything about 5K, let's say 5K, for example, but it also increases 5K. And you also get an increase of like 5 dB or stuff like that. Also, what happens with a lot of these EQs, they also make a bump in the bass. They would increase the bass. So let's just say that you cut around 80 hertz. Well, yeah, the roll off is going to start at 80 hertz, but you are going to get an increase at 80 hertz, 100 hertz. You are going to get some kind of a resonance. And that's why these EQs sound different. Obviously, if you talk about stuff such as the Pultec EQ, the very interesting thing about the Pultec is that it increases the bass, but also lowers some of the low mids. That's actually how it works, and that's the reason why it sounds great, because it will increase some of the low frequencies, but it will also decrease some of the lower mid frequencies, and that is great because usually it is going to lower the second harmonic for a lot of stuff that's really, really useful when you're mixing. I'm talking about that. And the reason why people do that is because it sounds good. But for you, who is supposed to listen to something on YouTube, this creates a drastic difference, right? Right? So it is a huge difference, but I'm just telling you, like, what are the things that people usually do. Now, getting back to the YouTuber thing, there are a lot of YouTubers who don't really do anything. There's that sort of school of YouTubers where people like to give you the unprocessed result. They would give you an SM57. They would give you exactly the same cabinet. And I personally like to watch these channels because I find that interesting, because I do have a certain reference. The problem with a lot of these channels and those kinds of sounds is that usually they don't get the same popularity as some other types of sounds would get. For example, some really cool processed sounds, right? A lot of people would be like, because most people don't talk about these things, most people would be like, hey, I love how this sounded on Rebia's channel, for example. Yeah, but on Rebia's channel, everything is heavily post-processed. Heavily post-processed. And I'm not saying this because I like it or dislike it. It doesn't really matter. Just the fact that you should know that such a thing is post-processed and heavily post-processed is important, because then you know that, all right, so what I'm hearing over here isn't really the thing that I would hear when I plug it in. Does that make sense? And also, when you listen to these channels who would give you this very raw SM57 type of sound, that's totally great. But even that can be argued, because you've got different 57s. Everybody has a different speaker, different way how they do it. So it is super, super complicated. And in many ways, listening to sounds on YouTube doesn't make sense. And I didn't come to the mastering part, and I didn't talk about compression. I didn't talk about, well, there's also YouTube, but if you know how to do your mastering for YouTube, then you would not have a problem. When people would say like YouTube fucks it up, well, YouTube doesn't fuck it up if you do the mastering right. But you have to master for this kind of stuff. Even I do a lot of mastering for you guys to hear my sound at the required level. Because if I didn't do that, the guitar wouldn't be loud enough, right? So let me just run you through something like super simple, really, really quickly. Because if we use a clean sound, so I'm gonna go to the single coil position. That was a weird chord. I'm in drop C. So I've got this clean sound going on. Now, what happens? Yeah, Dave Berry says 14 LUFS, I think. Yeah, approximately 14 for social media, depending on the social media. But yeah, approximately. Yeah. Aradia, what's up? So what happens is that if I disengage everything what you're listening to now, all right, except some of the last, I'm just gonna leave some last gain increase, some kind of a limiter. Listen to the clean sound now. If I would disengage that limiter, then you wouldn't hear pretty much like anything. So I'm gonna engage the cabinet. I'm gonna engage the EQ now, that cuts the lows and the highs and gives those little bumps. And I also have a little bit of compression going on. But the compression that I do for YouTube videos, the compression that I do is very, very light. But the reason why I do compression for these videos is because, for example, clean sounds on very high headroom amplifiers, they don't really realistically record well without any compression. And I remember one time I still have, obviously, a friend made some very early YouTube video, and he sent me a message like, yeah, man, but it doesn't sound that good, whatever. And then he sends me actually Ribia's video, and he's like, look at how his stuff sounds. And I'm like, you're a musician. How do you not know that what he is doing is like a full post-processing, mastering and everything, and I just recorded the sound basically only with an IR, or was I recording a speaker? Doesn't really matter. Very raw sound, because I thought that people would benefit from such a sound. But that is not the reality, right? People were like, yeah, let's go watch Ribia's video because he does a lot of compression. Look at his clean sound. And I'm not in any way saying anything bad about Ribia. Actually, I like his playing and his channel and sound. I have no issues with that. You have to compress, right? Especially clean sound. So let's check it out. Doesn't make any sense. I obviously have a little bit of YouTube and reverb. Yeah, a little bit of delay and reverb. I've been working all day, people. You will have to forgive me. So compression. Let's engage the compression. Right? So you can hear that it's louder, but not only that it's like a little bit louder, it's slightly compressed, ever so slightly. It's like 1.5 ratio. It's very light compression. It is barely touching the compressor. But this is something that I think it's really necessary, especially with this type of sound. If I was working on a really clean sound, like really wanted to record something that was supposed to end up in a song on an album or stuff like that, I would definitely go about compressing the signal, maybe even more, really depending on what I'm trying to achieve. But realistically, and this is the point which I'm trying to make, I understand that sometimes it takes a long time. What can I do? But back in the day, when there are a lot of people who say like, yeah, this guy didn't use anything, there were no compressors, they didn't do this, didn't do that. Yeah, but they recorded to tape. You know, you have to take in account every single step of the signal, every single step on the way. You have to take in account. There are some mixing engineers who didn't do pretty much any kind of compression, and they would have a completely different style of mixing, but they would know that after the entire mixing process, they're going to heavily hit that tape machine, and you're gonna essentially get that compression and overdrive that we normally now have to add in our DAW. You understand what I'm saying? So basically what happens is that people don't pay attention to a lot of these aspects of the sound, to a lot of these small things that are really important that drastically change the sound. I just feel like people should be more aware of that. Maybe I am the only person who is maybe I'm the only person who is interested in these things. I hope not. But realistically, if you know this kind of stuff, if you understand what I'm talking about now, if you learn a little bit more about it, then you'd be much more vigilant, and you would understand a lot of the stuff, a lot of the things that you are hearing, especially on YouTube. You would understand it more. You would understand it better. And in the end, you will train your ears and you will be able to hear the things that you actually want to hear. So let me just remove the guitar. It's getting really, really hot, people. Like here, down in Serbia, it's ridiculously hot. It was like 39 degrees today, Celsius, I'm talking. Let me check on some of the comments. So yeah, people were discussing the LUFS thing. Well, yeah, so listen, LUFS is like quite important. If people don't know what the LUFs mean, well, basically, it's a standard of measuring that we use today, which is really, really useful. Sometimes measuring loudness is not as easy. This sort of relates to the topic of that recent video that I kind of made regarding the Peacekeeper speaker, where there was some talk about the decibels and the power and the acoustic pressure and stuff like that. Hayes, what's up? So there is that story. Measuring loudness is not really easy because we all hear differently. But some smart people, they made some nice standards which are used today for measuring loudness, and that stuff is super useful. Now, measuring these LUFs is super useful because it gives us a number that we can all relate to, which tells us how loud is something. It has gone a long way, and LUFs are pretty good. And there have been different standards and there are different philosophies regarding this, and I don't really want to get into that. But it is important, and it's a great number to have for somebody who is new to this whole thing. You can kind of find your way around your loudness. You can make it loud enough for social media, or as I see now. So Hayes is saying, I master my tracks to -8 to -7 loves. When I do that, I'm an amateur too. Well, mastering is something that I really wish that one day I will be good enough to do mastering, because mastering is something that I take really, really seriously. A lot of people today, a lot of people today, I met a kid recently on some gig, and he was like something like 19, 20, and he told me that he's doing mastering. I'm like, oh, you're doing mastering? Well, you can't do mastering if you're 19, 20. I'm sorry. I believe that mastering is the first prerequisite for mastering would be experience, and a lot of experience with music and sound systems and so on and so on. And when it comes to those loves, yeah, you can clearly see, if you go to some music videos and if you go to those stats for nerds on YouTube, you can see that a lot of the music videos, they are louder basically, and they have this mastering which is around -8, -7. It is okay. So mastering is a huge topic. We're not gonna get into it, but definitely music videos would have much louder signals, much louder songs, and then YouTube compresses it additionally. So that's totally weird. But when it comes to YouTube videos, we kind of master everything to -14 dBs, and that includes produced tracks, which is something that I'm gonna be doing more in the next in the future, basically. As soon as I finish the course now, then I'm just switching back to YouTube videos all day long. So yeah, the mastering stuff is quite complicated. Yeah, Hayes is saying, so back in 2003, one of my bands took tracks to Real Mastering House in Nashville. Talk about equipment. Yeah, mastering stuff is super interesting. Mastering studios are ridiculous, and good mastering engineers are rare. Yet another hot take. But yeah, people who do mastering, they know their stuff. And I also believe that whenever you mix something, you should want and let someone do the mastering, if you know what I mean, because it's always really good to have somebody else's additional input and somebody else's experience. Because when you mix something, I can do the mastering, I can make it loud enough based on the loves, but I'm not objective because I mixed the track. So I think that's like super important. But yeah, if you listen to, for example, Ola's videos, if you go about listening to YouTubers producing their track, they are not as loud because they're not mastered as loud as the typical song would be on YouTube. Therefore, they would not be, it would just sound different. I would just say it like that. There are different YouTube channels. Some of the YouTube channels do like really, really great mastered tracks. Some people don't pay attention to this stuff. They don't even do it at all, which is absolutely great. But yeah, we kind of talked about a lot of things now, and we ran through the typical, let's just say, like mixing setup that you would use for recording guitars on YouTube. And I would say that the most important thing to remember from all of this is that you should take stuff with a grain of salt. Is that the right way to how to say it in English? I think that's the right way to approach this, because it is very good to have an objective opinion on the stuff that you're hearing. And in some regards, it doesn't even matter what you're hearing unless you try a certain piece of equipment. I don't think that you should be very hyped about it, especially if you want to trust the people who are doing marketing for it on YouTube. We have kind of realized that we don't really need to give into the hype. That's just the only thing that I'm going to say about it. But realistically, it is very sad that a lot of the smaller shops are getting closed, because we don't have the opportunity to hear stuff. But then again, how would we live without the guitar YouTube? How would we live without YouTubers presenting stuff to us? Like, we would have a huge problem. That's the way where the industry moved, and now we have a lot of these obviously channels and a lot of these companies presenting equipment to us. And even though I say these things regarding the mastering, regarding the mixing, and it all kind of sounds don't trust what you hear, it's not about don't trust what you hear. It's about learn what you're listening to and learn what to listen for. Now that was wise, right? So basically, what I'm trying to say is that I do enjoy YouTube videos and I do enjoy YouTube channels and I do enjoy listening to some YouTubers play. The more you watch them, the more you kind of develop a relationship with these people. Is kind of weird, I understand, but you do develop a relationship with these people and you tend to you figure out what they're trying to say. A lot of the times YouTubers are not saying what they want to say because of different reasons, but you can kind of read it, you know. That is the advanced you how to watch guitar YouTube videos. So I think that people should be educated about this. It's just a healthy topic to talk about. So Hayes is saying, so yeah, grain of salt. I say take it with a whole salt lick. Yeah, well, for a lot of these things, most definitely. But tell you what, I absolutely love when I go back to some of these older videos. I do remember watching, what was it, pro guitar demos, stuff like that, and Gearman Dude. I already mentioned him. I loved watching these videos because they did have sort of a standardized way on what you're hearing, like just the way how they would produce the guitars. And when you watch a bunch of these pedals, you kind of get an idea. You kind of get an idea about what you're going to get. And it is some kind of piece of information. But maybe I was a little bit, well, not provoked, but motivated to talk about these things more because I saw a lot of these people do all kinds of bullshit with gear, a lot of like really weird sounds that people make on YouTube. And then you go to the comment section and then you see a lot of people discussing how something sounds like, also YouTubers discussing how something sounds like, and, you know, using a lot of terminology, which is yet again not really explainable and not objective. And that kind of led us here where everybody is like, you know, a little bit tired of the whole gear thing and nobody really cares anymore. It's not like nobody cares, but come on, like it's not really as interesting as it once was. And I would really like the whole thing to come back, but I think it will come back. And it's also going to come back with a little bit more interesting stuff. I think that the stuff is going to change for sure, but I think that also people are going to start filtering stuff more because it's a thing that happens in every industry. You always have a certain period when you get a lot of bullshit. And then it kind of turns over and the quality stuff survives and the bullshit doesn't survive. And that's, I would say, like in everything. So I think that's also going to happen. Also going to happen now on the whole YouTube thing where some people are going to survive really well and some people are just, you know, not. But I wish them the best. Now, in any case, just a few more days, you can, for just the next few days, you can get the Big Muff course for 50% off. I think that's a great price. After that, it's going to go up. It is almost fully uploaded. Already people are digging in with the content. I think it's super interesting and it's a good opportunity that you can go and get this course. It is my new baby, so I do have to promote it a little bit. I hope that you will forgive me for promoting something that's kind of making this channel exist, right? but I think it is ridiculously good. I can't tell you yet how long the content is, but it's like really long. There's a lot of content over there, and I'm so tired from editing this whole thing. My back is really aching for the seaside, which is also going to happen in the next month. But yeah, go get the Big Muff if you're interested into DIY. If you'd like to learn pedal design and pedal building, I think it's the perfect resource because over there I just talk about absolutely everything that I know. We're gonna work on it. We're gonna improve it. The next course that will come is going to be even better. So I'm super happy that people are actually interested in this whole thing, and I'm super happy that I'm gonna get feedback from you guys, and I'm most definitely going to improve upon all these things that, when I get the feedback, when people say, like, when I see what were the things that I maybe potentially missed in some lessons, what were the things that maybe need a little bit of clarification. I think that's going to be super fun. And we are also going to implement some kind of way of communication on the website. So for all the people on the academy, I'm still figuring this whole thing out, but that is the next step. We're going to create a community. So I want everybody to like build pedals, mod pedals. I want people to share the designs, to share the mods. But I think that's the absolute best way. If you're new into DIY, everything goes from the beginning. If you're the more intermediate or advanced builder, I would say that you are also going to hugely benefit. I understand advanced builders would know a lot of things, but I share a lot of things over there. And also, we talk about the software used. I teach you how to use that software. I would think that this kind of pedal design course is something that the internet really needs. It is the summation of like over 15 years of reading absolutely everything on the internet and school and all that kind of stuff and prototyping a bunch of different circuits, and I can't wait to get into these different circuits. All right, because now it was the Big Muff. The Big Muff is ridiculously fun, but come on, when we dive into these different circuits, it's gonna be super crazy. So Hayes saying, I'm currently making a Big Muff pedal from a PCB that was gifted to me by Coder. I've never seen their PCBs, but yeah, definitely. You can make like 20 Big Muffs and none of them are going to sound the same. And there are so many cool mods that you can do using that typical Big Muff PCB. You can cut some traces and do some like crazy things. I explore it quite a bit in the course. There's a lot of great stuff. I just love Big Muffs. What can I tell you? And by the way, in the course, we're talking about the 4 transistor Big Muff. I did not dive into the op amp Big Muff because it's a completely different circuit, but we're gonna have courses about that as well. And so also Hayes, I'm going to design it like a clone KTR with the phase. Kindly remember, the fuzz loved by so many is not a true. Yeah, I love Hayes that we're having some of these like really nerdy jokes right over here. But in any case, it is great. It is great stuff. It is great to learn these things because you can always go and buy pedals, and I love getting pedals from other people. Not getting like buying pedals from other people. I have to correct myself because it's not like I'm getting pedals for free. Like, oh, come on. But sometimes I like other people to design something. And I also like the stuff that I design. I think both things are fun. I really think that both things are fun. And there's some really, really cool and really interesting gear out there, which is which we would all love to have. But yeah, we're gonna talk about it in another live. In any case, go check the Big Muff out. If you can share it, that would be great. Share it to some people. I'm gonna come back with some like cool videos. The next thing that I planned, the next video that I'm gonna make in the next few days, I just need a little bit of time to make it. It's gonna be quite interesting. Something regarding reactive loads and some measurements. Something that I got a friend of mine. I got measurements from him. He used some relatively rare, expensive piece of equipment to do measurements of a lot of these different reactive loads that are on the market. And we're going to release that in a video. We're going to talk about it in a video. I think it's going to be very valuable and very useful to a lot of people. All right. So we're going to make a lot of good content. And in any case, I'm going to bail out. I'm going to go drink my sparkly water, have a cigarette. Guys, thank you all for being here. And I'll be seeing you in the next live session, which is going to be next week. So very